cowboy ripped the Navajo woman's shirt. The next day, 500 warriors came for him. The sun rose slowly over the vast desert, casting a golden light on the rocky hills and the scattered sagebrush. The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the smell of earth and dust. A lone cowboy rode along a narrow trail, his horse's hooves crunching on the stones beneath them. The cowboy was tall, strong, and confident, with a worn hat pulled low over his face and a leather coat that had seen many seasons. He had spent most of his life traveling the western lands, stopping in small towns and ranches, always searching for work or adventure. That morning, he came across a small Navajo settlement tucked between two cliffs. The village was quiet, almost peaceful, with clay and wood houses built close together. Smoke rose from the chimneys, and the sound of children laughing in the distance floated on the breeze. The cowboy slowed his horse, curious about the people and the way they lived. He had seen many towns in his life, but there was something different about this one. A calm, quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from the people. As he rode closer, he noticed a young Navajo woman walking near the edge of the settlement. She carried a small bundle of firewood on her back, her hair neatly braided, and her movements careful and graceful. She seemed unaware of the cowboy at first, focused on her work and the path she walked. But the cowboy, feeling bold and perhaps a little reckless, decided to approach her. He nudged his horse forward, making a slight noise to get her attention. The woman turned her head, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. There was a mix of caution and curiosity in her gaze. She did not speak, only stepped back slightly, holding her bundle tighter. The cowboy, mistaking her silence for shyness or submission, leaned closer, a smirk forming on his face. He reached out suddenly and tore at the front of her shirt. The fabric ripped with a sharp sound. The woman gasped, startled and angry, and quickly covered herself with her hands. Nearby villagers had seen what happened. They stopped their work and watched in shock. Some murmured under their breath, others froze in disbelief. The cowboy laughed, thinking it was a joke, thinking it was harmless fun. But the woman's face told a different story. Her eyes were wide, not with fear but with hurt and indignation. She took a step back, her body tense, ready to defend herself if necessary. The cowboy did not understand. In his world, actions like this might have been brushed off, ignored, or laughed at. But here, in this village, his behavior was more than disrespectful. It was an insult. It was a violation of trust and the honor of the woman and her community. The villagers were angry, and whispers of outrage began to spread. Some of the men moved closer, their hands hovering near the weapons at their sides, ready to protect their people. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You cannot treat me like this," she said, her words carrying across the dusty ground. The cowboy laughed again, not taking her seriously. He waved his hand as if brushing off the anger around him. "Relax," he said. "It was just a little fun." No harm done. But harm had been done. In the Navajo culture, respect was everything. Women were honored and protected, and any insult against them was taken seriously. The elders in the village were already discussing what had happened, and the young warriors were listening carefully. The cowboy, unaware of the rules and the traditions, continued on his way, thinking the matter was over. He mounted his horse and rode off down the dusty trail, leaving the village behind, unaware that he had sown the seeds of conflict. The woman, still shaken, gathered her bundle of firewood and returned to her home. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was clear. She knew that what happened could not be ignored. Her family listened as she told them this story, her words precise and strong. The elders nodded gravely. In their eyes, the cowboy's act was not just an accident. It was a challenge, a test of the community's strength and honor. As the sun climbed higher, the village slowly returned to its daily rhythm. Children ran and played. The smoke continued to rise from the chimneys, and the women tended to their homes. But beneath the calm there was a quiet determination. The community would not let such disrespect go unanswered. Every step they took that day, every glance exchanged, carried the memory of what had happened. Meanwhile, the cowboy rode on, enjoying the warmth of the sun and the freedom of the open trail. He stopped at a small creek to water his horse, still chuckling about the incident. He did not see the eyes watching him from the distance, the villagers who had gathered on the hillsides to see where he went. He did not hear the whispers carried by the wind, words of warning in preparation for what was coming. By the end of the day, the cowboy had reached a small town on the edge of the desert. He tied his horse to a post outside a general store and went inside, speaking loudly and laughing with the locals. He boasted about his adventures and the people he had met, not realizing that the story he had created about himself was not the one the Navajo would accept. To them, his actions had created a debt that could not be ignored. As night fell, the village settled into a quiet darkness. Fires burned in small hearths, and the wind carried the scent of sage and earth. The woman lay awake, thinking about the cowboy and what he had done. She felt a mixture of anger and resolve. She knew that the next day would be important, that the community would act not out of cruelty but out of honor and respect. And somewhere in the dark, beyond the hills, the cowboy slept peacefully, unaware that his actions had set a chain of events in motion that he could not undo. The desert night stretched on, full of stars and silence, holding its breath for what was to come. The first part of the story ended not with violence, but with the quiet building of tension, the clash of two worlds, and the beginning of a reckoning that would test courage, respect, and the power of community. The morning after the incident began quietly in the Navajo village. Sunlight spread across the desert, glinting off the rocks and illuminating the clay houses. Smoke rose gently from the chimneys, and the distant calls of birds echoed across the canyons. Yet beneath this calm, the village was restless. News of what had happened with the cowboy had already begun to ripple through the settlement like a swift river, leaving no one untouched by anger or concern. The young woman who had been wronged walked carefully among the houses, her movements controlled, her mind racing. Every step reminded her of the disrespect she had suffered, and her thoughts returned again and again to the cowboy's careless laughter. She did not speak loudly, but her eyes held a fire that could not be hidden. Villagers noticed the determination in her face, and whispers passed between them. Respect for women was sacred in their community, and no one could ignore that the balance of honor had been disturbed. Word reached the elders quickly. They gathered near the central hearth, a circle of wise men and women whose judgment carried authority across the village. Their faces were grave, lined with years of experience and understanding. One of the elders, a man with silver streaking his black hair, spoke first. "This act cannot be forgotten," he said, his voice low but firm. "It is not just an insult to her. It is an insult to all of us. The cowboy does not understand our ways. We must act, and we must act with strength and care." The others nodded in agreement. They began to discuss what could be done. Their customs were clear. Offenses against women were not to be ignored, but the response had to be measured. Violence could occur, yes, but it had to honor the law of the people and the guidance of the elders. The young warriors of the village listened carefully, absorbing every word, every gesture. Their hands rested near their weapons, but their minds focused on strategy and respect, not impulsive revenge. Meanwhile, outside the village, the cowboy rode without concern. The sun was warm on his back and the wind lifted his coat as he moved through the open desert. He thought about the previous day and laughed quietly to himself. "They'll get over it," he said aloud, unaware of the quiet storm brewing behind him. He stopped near a small creek, letting his horse drink, and did not notice the distant figures on the cliffs above, watching silently. The villagers had already sent scouts to follow him, learning where he had gone, so that the community could act if needed. Back in the village, the young woman shared her story with her family and friends. She spoke carefully, explaining exactly what had happened, but without exaggeration. Her words were strong, carrying the weight of truth. Those who listened felt the injustice, and the elders' faces grew even more serious. They explained that the cowboy's behavior was not just rude, it challenged the honor of the entire tribe. The young warriors began preparing themselves mentally, understanding that protecting their people and teaching lessons of respect was as important as any battle. As the day passed, the story of the cowboy traveled beyond the village. Other nearby Navajo settlements heard of the insult and the disrespect shown. Messages were carried on horseback across the hills and canyons, spreading quickly among the people. Elders from neighboring communities discussed the matter. In their eyes, justice was needed. but it had to be executed wisely. This was not just about anger. It was about teaching a lesson and preserving the dignity of their women and their traditions. The cowboy, oblivious to all of this, stopped at a small frontier town by the afternoon. He tethered his horse and walked into the general store, greeting the locals with a wide smile. He boasted about his travels and the women he had met, laughing loudly. Some townsfolk looked at him with curiosity, others with suspicion, but no one knew the danger that followed him. In his mind, he was free and untouchable, moving through the world with confidence, unaware that every word he spoke added to the urgency of the Navajo response. Meanwhile, in the village, preparations were underway. Young men practiced quietly with their weapons, running through strategies and plans. Elders guided them, reminding them that their strength came not only from skill but also from respect, patience, and unity. The village blacksmith sharpened tools, not for destruction, but for protection. Horses were ready to ride at a moment's notice. The air was filled with tension and determination. Every person understood their role, every small act part of a larger effort to maintain honor and prevent further disrespect. As evening approached, the young woman stood on a small hill overlooking the desert. She could see the fading sunlight painting the rocks orange and red, and the cool air settled on her face. She thought about the cowboy, imagining him unaware of the consequences that would soon reach him. She felt a mix of fear and resolve, knowing that the community's response was necessary, but also knowing that it must follow the customs that had guided her people for generations. She was proud of her culture, of the strength and wisdom of her elders, and of the unity of her community. By nightfall, the village had transformed. Fires burned brighter, horses were secured, and the young warriors gathered in small groups to discuss plans. They were ready to act if the cowboy returned to the area or threatened anyone else. Elders reminded them to act with courage, intelligence, and honor, never with impulsive anger. The village slept uneasily, but with a quiet confidence. They knew the cowboy had underestimated the strength of their people, and that his ignorance would soon meet the consequences of disrespect. Far away, the cowboy slept under the open sky. The stars glittered above, endless and indifferent to human actions. He dreamed of adventure, of the open trail and the freedom of travel. He did not hear the wind whispering warnings, did not see the shadows moving across the hills. The desert night held its breath, carrying with it the quiet but unstoppable determination of a community that would not allow dishonor to stand. By the early hours of the next morning, scouts had returned with news. The cowboy was still unaware of the growing storm, still moving carelessly through the frontier towns. The elders gathered once more to review their plans. They spoke of honor, justice, and the responsibility of protecting their people. Every voice carried weight, and every decision was deliberate. The community's resolve had solidified into action. They would confront the cowboy, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for their traditions and for the woman whose dignity had been challenged. The desert itself seemed to echo the tension. The wind shifted through the canyons, stirring dust across the rocks. Animals stirred quietly, sensing change in the air. The village remained calm on the surface, but beneath that calm was a powerful energy, a readiness that could not be ignored. The young warriors prepared their mounts and weapons, the elders prayed for wisdom, and the women shared quiet words of encouragement. Every person had a role, every action meaningful. As the sun began to rise again, painting the desert in shades of gold and pink, the village was ready. They had waited, watched, and planned. The insult of the cowboy would not be forgotten, but it would be met with the careful, measured, and honorable response that had guided their people for generations. And somewhere beyond the hills, the cowboy continued to move, unaware that the next day would bring him face to face with the strength and unity of a people who would not tolerate disrespect. The morning sun spread slowly across the desert, painting the cliffs in soft gold and red hues. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth. In the Navajo village, the air was alive with quiet activity. This was not the ordinary hum of daily life. It was the careful movement of a community preparing for a decisive moment. The elders had spoken. The young warriors had listened. And now the entire village was moving with purpose. The young warriors gathered in the central courtyard, a group of strong men and boys just reaching adulthood. Their faces were serious, their eyes clear and focused. The elders had instructed them carefully. This was not about anger or revenge. It was about honor, respect, and teaching a lesson to someone who had shown ignorance of their ways. The warriors listened to every word, absorbing the wisdom that had guided generations before them. Their hands rested on the hilts of their tools and weapons, not with aggression, but with readiness. Nearby, the village blacksmith worked steadily, sharpening knives, mending bows, and preparing horse gear. The rhythmic sound of metal against stone echoed through the village like a heartbeat. Each strike was deliberate, a signal of the preparation underway. Horses were brought to the stables, brushed and saddled, their hooves stamping softly against the dirt. The warriors spoke in quiet tones, exchanging information about trails, the cowboys' likely path, and the terrain beyond the village. Every detail mattered. Every small action could make a difference in what was to come. The elders convened once again near the largest fire in the village. Smoke spiraled into the sky as they discussed strategy. Their conversation was measured, thoughtful, and full of respect for tradition. They spoke of the cowboy, of his recklessness, and of the insult he had caused. But they also spoke of caution. The goal was not unnecessary bloodshed, but a demonstration of their strength and unity. They reminded the warriors that their actions reflected the entire community and that honor required discipline as much as courage. As the conversation continued, scouts returned from the hills. They had followed the cowboy, tracking his movements and noting his stops in small towns. The elders listened carefully, nodding at the details. The scouts described him laughing, boasting, unaware of the growing storm behind him. The elders shared knowing looks. "He does not understand," one of them said softly. "He thinks this is a game. We will show him that our ways are not to be taken lightly." The young warriors began to form groups, each with a clear role. Some were tasked with riding ahead to observe. Others would remain closer to the village to guard against any unexpected threats. Maps of the land were discussed, mental notes of paths, hills, and streams carefully memorized. The desert could be both friend and foe, and understanding it was part of the preparation. The elders reminded them of the importance of patience. "Strength alone will not win," one said. "Wisdom, timing, and unity will guide us." By midday, the village was fully engaged in preparation. Women moved quietly, carrying supplies and offering words of encouragement. Children watched from the edges, learning the importance of responsibility, courage, and respect. The air was tense but calm, filled with anticipation rather than fear. Every movement, every conversation, carried the weight of what was to come. The young woman who had been wronged walked among the villagers, observing quietly. Her eyes reflected both pride and determination. She understood that the coming day would test more than strength. It would test the wisdom and honor of her people. Horses were brought to the front of the village, their saddles adjusted, and reins carefully checked. Warriors mounted, their expressions focused, eyes scanning the horizon. The elders moved among them, offering advice, reminders of customs, and encouragement. "Remember," one elder said, "our purpose is to protect our people, to restore honor, and to teach a lesson. Do not let anger cloud your judgment. Act with respect as our ancestors would have done." The warriors nodded, gripping their reins tightly, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing on their shoulders. As the afternoon heat rose, the warriors practiced quietly. They ran drills through the nearby fields, tested the responsiveness of their horses, and reviewed signals and formations. The movements were deliberate, precise, and careful. Even as they prepared for potential confrontation, there was an underlying calm. They were not reckless or impulsive. Every action reflected discipline, unity, and the centuries of knowledge passed down through their elders. The young woman, too, contributed to the preparation. She visited the elders, offering information she had observed about the cowboys' habits and recent path. Her observations were clear, logical, and valuable. The elders smiled at her insight. "You see clearly," one said. "Your courage is part of the strength of our people." This is not only about men on horseback. Everyone has a role, and everyone's wisdom is important. She nodded, feeling a sense of pride and responsibility. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a brilliant shade of orange, streaked with pinks and purples. The village paused briefly, observing the beauty of the desert, taking a moment to gather strength. Even in preparation for confrontation, life moved steadily. Fires were tended, water was carried, and meals were prepared quietly. The elders reminded everyone that the coming events were serious, but not to let fear dominate their hearts. Courage was not the absence of fear, they said, but the mastery of it. As evening approached, the scouts returned once again with news of the cowboy. He had stopped at a small outpost to trade supplies and had boasted loudly to strangers about his travels. The warriors listened intently, imagining the cowboy's arrogance, unaware that every boast increased the resolve of the people he had offended. The elders nodded in satisfaction. The time to act was approaching, but still, patience was key. Every decision had to reflect honor and careful judgment. The desert night arrived slowly, and the village lit up with small fires. Shadows danced across the walls of the houses, and the quiet rhythm of preparation continued. Horses were fed, weapons checked one last time, and warriors gathered in small circles to discuss the final plans. The elders moved among them, their presence calm and steady. They reminded the warriors that strength alone was not enough. Respect, honor, and wisdom will guide us, one elder said softly. Act with purpose, and you will succeed without unnecessary harm. Far beyond the village, the cowboy continued his journey. He was unaware of the storm gathering behind him. He laughed, talked, and rode freely, oblivious to the careful observation and preparation of the people he had offended. The scouts had mapped his trail, the elders had analyzed his likely path, and the young warriors had memorized every detail of the land he would cross. Soon, the desert itself would become a stage for a confrontation guided by discipline, respect, and unity. By the end of the night, the village was ready. Every warrior knew their role, every elder had given guidance, and the young woman felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that her community would act to restore honor. Fires burned steadily, casting warm light on the faces of determined people. Horses rested, prepared for the ride ahead. The desert lay silent, holding its breath, waiting for the moment when careful preparation would meet reckless ignorance. The elders gathered one final time before sleep. They spoke of courage, unity, and the importance of protecting their people. They reminded everyone that the upcoming day would not be about revenge, but about justice, respect, and honor. The young warriors listened, understanding that this moment was a test of character, strength, and wisdom. And as the stars sparkled above the desert, the village settled into a quiet, determined rest, knowing that soon the cowboy would face the consequences of his actions, not through anger, but through the steady, unwavering power of a united people. The night stretched on, long and still. The desert whispered its secrets through the wind, rustling the sagebrush and stirring the dust. The cowboy slept unaware of the planning, the observation, and the unity that now surrounded him. By morning, the stage would be set. Every decision, every action would carry weight. The warriors were ready, the elders were confident, and the woman's honor would be defended. The first rays of sunlight would mark the beginning of a test, a demonstration of the strength, wisdom, and unity of a people who had long understood the importance of respect. The morning light broke slowly over the desert, painting the rocky hills in shades of gold and rose. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sage and earth, and the desert was quiet, except for the soft rustle of wind through the grass. In the Navajo village, the warriors were already mounted, their horses shifting beneath them, eyes scanning the horizon. The elders stood nearby, watching silently, offering calm guidance. Everyone knew that today was the day the cowboy would face the consequences of his actions, but the approach would be measured, careful, and guided by honor. The young woman who had been wronged rode near the elders, sitting tall on her horse. Her eyes were steady, her hands firm on the reins. She felt a mix of nervousness and determination. She understood that the cowboy's arrogance had caused pain, not only to her, but to the entire community. Yet she also knew that their response needed to show strength, wisdom, and respect, not rash anger. Every glance she exchanged with the elders reassured her that the people she trusted would guide the confrontation. Far away, the cowboy continued on the dusty trail, unaware of the gathering storm. He rode freely, laughing to himself as he imagined the day ahead. He stopped briefly by a small stream to water his horse and talk to some travelers, boasting again of his adventures. He was oblivious to the careful eyes watching him from the distance. Scouts had been following him since he left the village, keeping track of every turn and stop. Every detail was noted, every movement memorized. The desert, wide and open, was now the stage for a test of wisdom and unity, and he did not yet realize it. By mid-morning, the warriors were in position. They moved quietly through the rocky terrain, using the hills and ridges for cover. Their horses were alert, trained to respond quickly to signals. Each group had a role. Some would remain visible to make the cowboy aware of their presence. Others would flank him if he tried to flee, and a few remained close to the village to guard against unexpected danger. The elders coordinated the strategy, ensuring that every action followed the customs and traditions of their people. This was not a simple chase or punishment. It was a demonstration of discipline, courage, and unity. As the cowboy rode through a narrow canyon, he began to notice something unusual. The wind shifted in a way that seemed strange, carrying faint whispers that he could not understand. Shadows moved along the rocks above him, but he dismissed them as tricks of the sun. Still, there was an uneasy feeling in his chest, a sense that he was being watched. He laughed nervously, telling himself that the desert could play tricks on the mind. But the villagers were close, watching his every movement, ready to step forward at the right moment. The first sign of confrontation came when a group of warriors appeared on a ridge above the trail. Their presence was unmistakable. 50 strong riders, their eyes calm and determined, blocking the path ahead. The cowboy reined in his horse, surprised and alarmed. He had expected no one to follow him, certainly not in such numbers. His heart beat faster, and for the first time that morning, fear replaced his arrogance. The warriors did not shout or charge. They stayed in place, showing strength and control. Their calm presence spoke louder than any words could. An elder stepped forward, riding slightly ahead of the group. He raised his hand, signaling the cowboy to stop. The cowboy dismounted quickly, unsure what to do. The elder spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the canyon. "You have disrespected our people," he said. "You have insulted one of our women, and in doing so you have challenged the honor of the entire community. You must understand the seriousness of your actions." The cowboy stammered, trying to explain himself, but the words sounded empty even to him. He realized that the laughter he had shared the day before had consequences, real and unavoidable. The young woman stepped forward, her face calm but resolute. "What you did yesterday cannot be ignored," she said firmly. "You must see that respect is not a choice, it is a responsibility. You cannot treat people as if they are less than you." Her voice carried through the canyon, strong and clear. The cowboy hung his head, finally understanding the gravity of his actions. He had thought himself free, above consequence, but now he could see the truth. The elders nodded, acknowledging his recognition of responsibility. "We do not seek to harm you without reason," one said. "But you must acknowledge the disrespect, and you must make amends. Only then can balance be restored." The warriors remained silent, their eyes alert, ensuring that the cowboy could not escape without addressing the wrongdoing. A discussion followed. The cowboy listened carefully, now fully aware of the traditions and values of the Navajo people. The elders guided the conversation, explaining the importance of respect, community, and honor. The young woman spoke about how the incident had affected her and her community, not with anger, but with clarity. The cowboy realized that this confrontation was not about punishment for its own sake, it was about teaching him the value of respect and responsibility. After some time the cowboy spoke, his voice steady but humble. He apologized sincerely, acknowledging his mistake and the harm he had caused. He promised to respect the people and their customs in the future. The elders listened closely, watching his demeanor. They could see the sincerity in his eyes, the understanding dawning on him that his actions had consequences beyond himself. The warriors relaxed slightly, recognizing that the situation had been handled with honor and wisdom. The young woman nodded, accepting his apology. It was a moment of closure, not only for her but for the entire community. The elders explained that this acknowledgement and commitment to respect were crucial. The cowboys' lesson had been learned, and the balance of honor restored. The desert canyon, once tense with anticipation, now held a quiet sense of resolution. The warriors and the woman had defended their dignity without unnecessary violence, using wisdom, discipline, and courage. As the cowboy mounted his horse once more, he felt a mixture of relief and respect. He understood that the desert held more than freedom and adventure. It held people with strength, wisdom, and principles he had never considered. The young woman and the elders had shown him that actions have consequences, that respect is essential, and that community and honor are powerful forces. He rode on slowly, thoughtful, and humbled, carrying with him a lesson he would never forget. The warriors watched him disappear into the distance, their mission complete. They returned to the village, proud of their careful preparation and disciplined approach. The elders guided them back, reminding them that honor is maintained not only through strength but through patience, wisdom, and unity. The young woman rode among them, proud that her dignity had been defended and that her people had acted with courage and respect. By evening, the village had settled once again. Fires glowed softly in the homes, and the desert air was calm. The canyon echoed only the wind and the distant calls of animals. The story of a cowboy would be remembered not as a tale of violence but as a story of respect, responsibility, and the strength of a united community. The young woman's courage and the warrior's discipline had restored balance. The elders smiled quietly, knowing that the traditions and wisdom of their people had once again guided them to justice. As night fell, the desert sky stretched endlessly, full of stars and quiet light. The cowboy camped far away, reflecting on the day's events. He thought about the young woman, the elders, and the warriors who had confronted him not with anger but with clarity and discipline. He realized that respect and honor were not just words. They were actions, commitments, and a way of life. The lessons of the desert and its people had changed him. In the village, the young woman watched the stars, feeling the calm of justice restored. The warriors gathered quietly around the fires, their faces illuminated by the warm glow. They spoke in low tones about discipline, courage, and unity. The elders reminded everyone that today had been a success not because of force, but because of wisdom and honor. The balance had been restored, and the community had acted in a way that upheld its values. The desert night was still, carrying a sense of peace and reflection. The cowboy would leave the area, changed by the encounter. The village would continue its life, strong, united, and honored. And the story of the day would pass into memory, a reminder that courage, wisdom, and respect are more powerful than recklessness or arrogance. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the rising sun, painting the cliffs in gold and orange, as if celebrating a new beginning. In the Navajo village, the air was filled with a quiet sense of calm and pride. The events of the past days had tested the people, their wisdom, and their unity, and now the community could breathe a little easier. The young warriors rode slowly through the village, their horses steady and strong, as they returned from the canyon where the confrontation with the cowboy had taken place. Their expressions were serious but relieved. They knew that their discipline and preparation had protected their people and upheld their honor. The young woman, whose dignity had been challenged, walked among the villagers, her shoulders straight, her eyes bright. She felt a mix of relief and pride. She had faced humiliation, yes, but she had also seen the strength of her community and the power of respect and unity. Her courage and clarity had guided the elders and warriors to act wisely, not out of anger, but out of principle. She understood now more than ever that honor was not something that could be taken lightly, and that the lessons learned through experience were sometimes stronger than any punishment. The elders convened once more near the central hearth, their faces calm and wise. They spoke quietly to each other about the events, reflecting on the importance of patience, observation, and careful planning. "We have shown him," one elder said, "that our ways are not to be disrespected. That is the lesson, and it has been understood. Others nodded in agreement. They reminded the community that strength alone was not enough to uphold their values. Discipline, wisdom, and unity were equally essential. The confrontation had ended peacefully because it had been guided by these principles. Meanwhile, far beyond the hills, the cowboy rode alone, reflecting on everything that had occurred. The arrogance and carelessness that had guided his actions were gone, replaced by understanding and humility. He thought about the young woman, about the elders, and about the warriors who had confronted him not with fury, but with clarity and honor. For the first time in his life, he realized that freedom and adventure carried responsibilities, and that respect for others was not optional. The desert had taught him a lesson that would remain with him forever. Back in the village, life began to return to its normal rhythm, but there was a subtle difference in the air. The people moved with renewed confidence, having demonstrated their strength and wisdom. Children played near the homes, their laughter ringing through the village, while the adults went about their daily routines. Yet beneath the ordinary, there was a quiet pride. They had faced a challenge together, and in doing so, they had reinforced the values that held their community together. Every glance exchanged between the elders, the young warriors, and the women carried the unspoken understanding that honor had been defended. The young woman spent the morning walking through the village, observing the people around her. She stopped by the small garden near her home, where herbs and vegetables grew carefully tended by the women of the village. She smiled softly, feeling a deep connection to the land and to her people. The events of the past days had reminded her of the importance of community, of respect, and of the wisdom passed down through generations. She knew that the story of the cowboy would be remembered not as a tale of fear, but as a lesson in humility, honor, and the strength of unity. The warriors gathered together to share their experiences. They spoke of the careful planning, the observations of the scouts, and the strategy that had guided their actions. They discussed what they had learned about discipline, patience, and respect. The elders listened quietly, proud of the young men who had acted with courage and wisdom.
"You have done well," one elder said. "You have protected your people and upheld our values."
That is more important than any victory achieved by force alone. The warriors nodded, understanding the depth of these words. In the afternoon, the village held a small gathering to celebrate the return to normalcy. Fires burned gently, and families shared food and stories. The young woman spoke to the villagers about courage, responsibility, and the importance of speaking clearly and standing firmly for what was right. Her words were not angry or bitter, but strong and clear, carrying the lessons of the past days. The villagers listened intently, inspired by her strength and clarity. They understood that her courage had been central to the peaceful resolution of the events, and that the lessons she shared would guide future generations. The elders took time to remind the community of the principles that had guided them through the confrontation. They spoke of respect, unity, and the importance of defending honor without unnecessary violence. They spoke of observation, patience, and careful planning as tools for resolving conflicts. The words were not a lecture but a reminder, a guide for living in a way that strengthened the community and honored tradition. The villagers absorbed these lessons, knowing that the values of their people were more powerful than any single challenge. As the day drew to a close, the sun dipped behind the cliffs, casting long shadows across the desert. The sky was painted in brilliant shades of orange, red, and purple, a reflection of the calm and pride that had settled over the village. The young woman stood on a small hill, looking out across the desert. She thought about the cowboy, about the elders, and about the warriors who had acted with such wisdom and strength. She felt a deep sense of connection to her people and to the land. The events of the past days had tested her, but they had also strengthened her, reminding her of the power of courage, respect, and community. The cowboy, still far away, rode slowly through the desert. He reflected on the lessons he had learned. He realized that the arrogance he had carried had blinded him to the values of others. He understood that respect and honor were not abstract concepts but actions that shaped relationships and communities. The encounter with the Navajo had changed him, giving him a new perspective on his life and the way he would treat people in the future. He would carry the memory of this lesson for the rest of his days. In the village, Night fell softly, and the air cooled. The stars appeared one by one, sparkling above the desert, like distant fires. The villagers settled around their homes, tending fires, sharing meals, and speaking quietly about the events of the past days. There was laughter, but also reflection. Every person understood that honor had been defended, that the community had acted with courage and wisdom, and that the lessons learned would endure. The young woman lay awake for a while, thinking of the desert, the people, and the future. She felt a deep peace, knowing that her dignity and the values of her people had been upheld. The next morning, the village awoke to a sense of continuity and purpose. Life returned to its rhythm, but with an added depth of understanding. Children learned the stories of courage, honor, and respect. Young warriors trained with renewed focus, guided by the wisdom of the elders. The young woman tended to her duties confident and proud. The desert itself seemed alive, a silent witness to the events that had unfolded and the lessons that would remain. In time, the story of the cowboy became part of the village's history, told carefully to younger generations. It was not a story of fear or violence, but a story of courage, preparation, and the importance of respecting others. Elders reminded the children that strength was meaningful only when guided by wisdom, and that honor was defended not through anger alone, but through unity and careful action. The lessons of those days shaped the community, strengthening the bonds between people and reinforcing the traditions that had guided them for centuries. The young woman grew into a leader within the village, her experiences shaping her understanding of courage, justice, and respect. She became a teacher of values, reminding the people that dignity and honor were central to every action. The warriors continued to serve their community with wisdom and strength, guided by the memory of the careful preparation and discipline that had restored balance. And the elders, quietly proud, continued to guide their people with patience, knowledge, and an unwavering commitment to tradition. The cowboy never forgot the lesson he had learned. He carried it with him as he traveled through new lands, treating people with respect, humility, and awareness of the consequences of his actions. He spoke to others of the wisdom of the Navajo and the power of community and honor, ensuring that the story would continue to teach lessons beyond the desert. The events had changed him, and he was grateful for the clarity and humility they had brought. The desert remained, vast and eternal, a witness to human courage, wisdom, and growth. The village continued its life, strong and united, its people bonded by shared experience and the knowledge that honor and respect were more important than any single moment of conflict. The story of the cowboy, the young woman, and the warriors became a testament to the power of community, the importance of wisdom, and the enduring strength of honor. As the sun rose each day, the village thrived, guided by the lessons of the past. Children played, women worked, and warriors trained, all carrying the memory of those events and the values that had guided them. And when the wind swept through the desert, whispering across the rocks and sagebrush, it seemed to carry a quiet message. Respect, courage, and unity are stronger than recklessness and ignorance, and honor, once defended wisely, lasts forever.